this morning in the just shy of an hour that we have is to give you a little bit of a walking tour through some of where we stand in terms of online courses at the university, also at the Kennedy School, and actually go beyond the title of the session is intentionally broad to include other forms of online and digital learning so that we can talk about what's going on campus and how we're thinking about it and looking forward. So I will sort of give you this little walking tour. I'll show you some video clips, whatever. I'll make you do a little bit of work, so you should have an index card. If you need a pen, get a pen. But also, although this isn't the greatest room in the world for moving around, it's very tight in the rows, and I apologize. It is 8:30 in the morning, so if you want to refill your coffee or whatever, I'm not going to take offense. You should do what you need to do. Okay, so let me start off by talking just a bit about the university and online courses. And first of all, one other sort of introductory comment. Classrooms at the Kennedy School tend to be very heterogeneous. It's one of the great joys of teaching here, one of the reasons I absolutely love it. I suspect that this morning is no different from that. There are people who know a fair bit. There are people who are just sort of want to dip their toe in the water and find out what this is all about, and everything in between. So in the spirit of a Kennedy School classroom, I hope we'll all learn from each other, and if there's someone who knows more than me, it'll be a great experience for me. And you can all learn from each other as well as from me. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to mention, not something that you would know if you haven't paid a whole lot of attention, is that there's actually a difference between Edx and HarvardX. So people talk about Edx as the consortium with MIT and the courses that are online, and then there's a sort of you go to the Edx website, you can get courses from any of the consortium universities. In fact, Edx is the platform. It is the means of delivering the courses that is common across the members of the consortium. But HarvardX is Harvard University's content on that platform. So the courses on HarvardX are Harvard faculty delivering courses that are designed for the online environment that is then delivered through Edx. So a lot of people talk about Edx. I will talk about HarvardX because it's the content that we're focused on. But Edx and HarvardX together share three founding principles, and they're somewhat different from Coursera or other deliverers of online courses. So I think it's important to articulate those up front. I mean, the first one is common to MOOCs in general, massively open online courses, expand access to education for everyone. So people who can't come to campus, conversations that we were having earlier, still have access to the ideas and the presentations and the content that would be delivered on a campus such as Harvard's. But the other two are actually a fair bit different, and they're more my focus today, because the first one, expanding access to education, is fairly straightforward. You put the course out there, and you don't charge for it, and people have the ability to connect. That in and of itself obviously rules out some parts of the world and rural areas, but you've expanded the access. But we really focus on enhancing teaching and learning on campus and online. It turns out that delivering a course online is not just setting up the camera in the back of the room and letting it run, and then taking everything that we do here this morning for the next hour and then putting it online and delivering it. That high quality education online requires a fair bit more work, both in terms of designing the pedagogy for the delivery system, for the remoteness, and creating valuable interactions, since, as I say, a lot of the learning comes from the people in the room. And then the third part is to advance teaching and learning through research. There's a big research component to HarvardX. There's a research committee, which I'll mention again in a minute, that really wants to use the data that's collected from the participants in these online courses to figure out how people learn about attention spans and how they navigate through the material and how they absorb the material and how they're actually learning in this environment, because there's a lot that we can do on campus with that information. So I'm going to give you just a quick little tour. Whoa. Quick little tour of HarvardX. This takes about a minute and a HKS, and what you saw there was a whole lot of different subject matter. There was science of cooking was in there, there was a poetry course, there was a justice course, there was computer science, all kinds of stuff. But the other thing that that you might have seen in there, they listed it out actually for the Heroes X course, all the different components that went into it, and the things that you would normally see in a classroom in terms of, you know, the faculty member and the teaching assistants, and the course materials were there, but then, you know, videographers and producers and a whole lot of other stuff goes into making an online course. So it's actually quite a significant endeavor. So we have one course on HarvardX so far, and several more in the making. The course that we have up there so far is actually, it's an interesting example because Graham Allison and David Sanger teach a course on campus that has about 40 students in it. It's very oversubscribed. Lots of students want to take that class. Central Challenges of American National Security, Strategy in the Press. And it's based on current things going on in the news. We've got a long waiting list for that course. So they decided to put that online. Huge amount of development going into creating a different environment, because a lot of what happens in a 40-person classroom, right, this is a 40-person classroom, a lot of what happens, you know, between us, and they had to create this they had 12,000 people register for this course. They also had this one other feature that they were very concerned about in the early design, which is given the topics that they cover in this course, there was the possibility that if they created an interactive discussion board, that there would be 12,000 people there, and that, you know, 11,999 of them would be well behaved, but there would be somebody who would say something incredibly inflammatory, and with 12,000 people, the TF couldn't possibly keep up. So they created a smaller version of this online course. It's called a SPOC. So that goes with MOOC. So MOOC is massively open online course. A SPOC is a small private online course. And they admitted 500 people to it. And they had much more interaction. The teaching fellows were very much more engaged in the discussion boards and interacting with the students and providing feedback on written assignments and whatever. So we now have 3 instances of this course. We have the 40-person class in person, we have the 500-person class, and then we have the very open one. So let me just show you what a small piece of their online one looks like. This clip is only about 20 seconds long. Just to show you, now that what you'll see is Graham Allison and David Sanger sitting at a table talking to each other and bringing in other displays. So they put up a map. And what you can't see in this particular clip is that there are students around the table. So they have live students, and then they're recording that session of the interaction with the students to try to replicate that for the students, for the 500 students who are not physically located here.
Because one of the topics that's now live for debate is whether Syria can ever be put back together again in its former borders, or whether it's going to end up splitting with the Alawites having a section, especially in the northwest, that they.
So that's just a little clip just to show you that they're there. There are students around the table. They're bringing in other materials. They had a number of videos. They had discussion boards. They had a whole kind of setup to deliver this course online. So that's our one so far. We have several others coming along. Tom Patterson, who's written a textbook on American government, is developing a course from HarvardX on American government, which we think will be very useful in a number of ways. First of all, there are a lot of people who would like to have that online course in the world, but also for our own students. We have a lot of students from outside the U.S. who would like to have a more solid grounding in American government. Some of our American students who have a more solid grounding in American government as well. So this would be sort of, I mentioned one of the great things about our classrooms is the heterogeneity of the students who come. Most heterogeneity is really, really great, but sometimes it's an opportunity for us to get some sort of leveling material out of the way before they come into the classroom, so we can do more together. Yeah.
So the clip we saw, that was for the online version.
Yes.
How would those two guys behave differently in that than they would if they were here and we had the 40-person class? I don't.
Not very much. So the interesting thing about that particular class, I'm not sure I can make a generalized answer to that, but for that particular class, I mean, Graham is a expert in national security policy. and David Sanger is a journalist. And so the two of them have very different perspectives, and so there is a lot of give and take and a lot of back and forth. And I think their course is taught as a conversation. Now, I don't think that you and I, well, I shouldn't say, I would think that it would be different to be in the room with them than it would be to be online. So I still think that there is a great deal of value of being in the room. You can raise your hand, you can ask questions. It's a little bit hard to kind of, type in something and is anybody listening when I ask my question from a distance. I also think one of the things that we've observed is a fair amount of interaction happens outside of the official time. You and I had an entire conversation while we were getting our respective breakfasts this morning, and if you had just Skyped in or used whatever, either asynchronously, if I had recorded this whole thing and you were in your hotel room watching it, we wouldn't have had that interaction, or even if it were synchronous and you were just watching a live streaming of this, we wouldn't have had that interaction.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So what's your strategy? Are you doing it along with the class at school, or are you, is there going to be a library of them available so I can take it whenever I want?
So there are archives of some of the HarvardX courses. Some of them are, the original versions of each of these courses were designed to be synchronous, meaning there's a window of time. It doesn't mean you have to watch the video at exactly 9 a.m. Eastern, but it does mean that there's a certain body of material that you should cover this week, because we're going to move on to the material next week. So some of them are being archived into asynchronous forms. You obviously don't get the feedback and the high touch kind of piece of that if there's no TF around,
right.
But you can still access the material. Our strategy for the Kennedy School is to tread relatively lightly here. So we've got the one course we're developing in Melder. There are a couple more that are sort of in the earlier stages. One of the things that we're really in the early stages of talking about is some basic financial management skills for nonprofits, which I think sort of all of our students ought to have. And so developing those materials not only for the world but also for our own students, because it gives us an opportunity to then do more with them while they're here.
Yep.
So I think there are kind of several different ways of thinking about it. Some is to kind of offload material that really is pre-material, that is stuff that kind of everybody should have, that enables us to do more interactive and more advanced work here on campus. And the other is obviously to make it available to other people.
You've got the 1 to 500 people.
Yes.
Then you said open one. How many can they take?
It can take an unlimited number. In essence, this particular one had 12,000.
Why did you have two?
The original reason was to be able to monitor the discussion. So, because given the topics, Iran, Syria, North Korea, to make sure that there were no sort of inflammatory comments coming from someone we didn't know out there. And with 12,000, it's kind of impossible to monitor the discussion board completely. So the idea was to limit the access to the
500
communication.
knew who they were and you
Yes.
chose them.
Yes.
And the 12,000 you didn't know who they were.
Correct. Well, I mean, HarvardX knows who they are by email address. They have to register for an account, but we don't screen them in any way. The 500 had to write a preliminary memo. They had to jump over some hurdles to be in that 500. Yes.
It wasn't clear to me following the question of the gentleman. So how does the interaction work? These 500 people could ask questions in them. How did that work?
So there were discussion boards and there were scheduled discussion times. So there were a number of different times throughout the week that students could log in and participate in a discussion with a teaching fellow. So those were synchronous. They were done, and the students were logging in at the same time. The 500 were spread out among a number of sessions, so they weren't all 500 at one time. But there were preset times where they were actually interacting with the teaching fellow.
So, however, this specific clip that you showed us effectively was a clip that people could just watch.
That's
and then during the week, they could interact with
Exactly
the
right. So there was reading, there was watching, and then there was discussion, and then there was writing. So there were multiple components to the
May I
course.
ask what difficult it is to reproduce that?
Sorry?
Because how difficult it is to launch this? Because it's not obvious that it is very difficult to take it through.
This is true. What I would say is that to do it at high quality, we're not interested in just taking a camera from the back of the room and putting it it out there. I've heard this analogy a number of times,
But it
so I don't know
looks
the
like
original
that.
source.
It looks, when I look at this clip, doesn't look any different than watching a clip on YouTube and then afterwards kind of logging in and speaking with a teaching fellow remotely. So I'm not, from my aspect, from where I stand, it's not clear how difficult this is it.
So, two things. The one part is there's the actual filming, and there are multiple cameras from different angles, and then it gets edited into something. So it's not sort of a single camera just watching the whole thing, and then you watch it just like you had been sitting in the back of the room. So it's an edited, produced piece of video. But the other part that I think is much more important from my perspective and much harder is figuring out what to put on video, what to put in text to read, how to structure the assignments and the discussions in a way that the learning actually takes place. For me, it's not about producing video and just putting it out there. It's about what kind of learning can actually take place. And what's hard about an online course or a segment is really figuring out how to do that.
Are you charging for the 500?
We did not charge in this instance for the 500. HarvardX is moving towards some sort of revenue experiments and there are certificates, verified certificates. I mean, I think it's safe to say that nobody has figured out the business model for online courses. HarvardX is very much in the mode of experimentation, and so that's what they're doing. So any new course now has to have a revenue experiment with it. You have to, the faculty member needs to sign on to say, okay, you can do this.
Do they write exams afterwards?
Some courses do have exams, some just have written memos. It depends on the course, just like it depends on all of the courses here. Some courses have exams, some courses have final papers. It varies quite a bit.
So, I can't remember whether it's Coursera or that famous Stanford course that they went online.
The circuits course, yeah.
I read later that something like less than 5% of the participants completed it.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
There's a compliance issue that rivals medicine in America. And what's going on? And do you have any way here? First, can you explain it, and second, what's going on with your courses? Do you have any way of knowing about?
We do. We do. So let me talk about the general phenomenon, which I think is very easily explained by a single statement. It is costless to sign up, or nearly costless to sign up. So I will give you a good example. My son signed up for the science and cooking course because he really loves science and he really loves cooking, and it sounded like a great course. So he has an account on Edx and he signed up for it. But then the AP chemistry exam and everything else got in the way, and he never saw a single video. He thinks he might do it this summer. Hard to know. It is costless to sign up. It sounds like a great idea. So you get tens, hundreds of thousands of people signing up. But a subset of that group is really going to engage in it. So one of the, there's actually research on this. One of the interesting things is when people pay for something, they obviously are more invested in it. So the 500 in this case did not pay for a certificate, but they did have to pay a time cost to enter into that 500. They had to, submit a memo, they had to participate in some activities before they could become enrolled, and in fact the completion rate was much higher. It was closer to 60% in that group, in the 500. So I think it's pretty easy to explain what's going on there, actually, and as long as the marginal cost of the 10,000 or the 100,000 person is zero, then whether the person completes it or not makes no difference on our end. But it teaches us a lot about how people make these decisions. Sorry, he was waiting first and I'll come back to you.
So it was actually in connection to that.
Yes.
Sebastian from Fast Company article. I was interested in 2 points. One, of those 12,000 that registered, how many were actually coming in to consume the content, and how many actually completed the whole, just from the data that I don't know if you can share the data with us.
I'm not sure I know the answer from the 12,000. It is a researchable question. I just don't have it at my fingertips. But if you want to ask me afterwards, I'm happy to look it
Sure,
up.
okay. And the other thing is, I think there's been so much buzz and excitement about MOOCs, and Bloomberg called it the greatest innovation in 2013, what was going on. And it strikes me that it's not necessarily the big change in education that we're looking for. I sometimes describe MOOCs as the animal farm of education. Like you take one system and it's, it's not necessarily scaling, let's just say. So I'd be really interested in what is the more Socratic model and more interactive model. So if we think there's two models of education, there's the traditional model that was developed out of the industrial age, that was learned by being taught and memorizing and then being tested and getting accredited, and then there's the much, much older classical model of education that goes back to Plato and Socrates, that you learn by hanging out with people you know. And so I'm really interested in what your thinking is of how do you facilitate much more interaction amongst the students, turn the students into teachers, so rather than being, they can share amongst each other. I'm really interested in that kind of collaboration.
So I will come back to talk more about that. I guess I have two answers. One, which I'll put off to show you some of how we think about that on campus and how we can use digital delivery of content in order to create more space in the classroom for more of that interaction and collaboration. There's another sort of second order, more minor answer to your question, which is, for example, for the Graham Allison class, right? You can take students who've actually taken the class in person, and they can then serve as the teaching fellows, and there's nothing better to cement your learning than to have to explain it to someone else. So there are opportunities as we put some material online to get our students engaged in creating some of that and helping to create that, and I think that's a great opportunity for the students who are actually here. That's a short answer, but I think the bigger answer, and now I'm really sort of regretting that I didn't have a 20-minute sort of presentation prepackaged for all of you who have watched last night, and we could have spent the entire hour talking, because I do want to show you a few things about what we're doing on campus.
Just really quickly, because I am one of the statistics about not completing courses. And so I spent last year taking a ton of MOOCs, like just experimenting with the various different platforms. And I think as we venture into this new area, we have to think broadly about what we're trying to do, because everybody learns differently. And I don't have an interest in taking the exam, but I do have an interest in looking, reading the material, and participating in the discussion. So completion rates, we can't box in this new area in our old way of thinking. We have to think more expansively about it.
I think that's right. No, I think that's a great point, and actually HarvardX is moving away from the term course and towards a term project, because course implies that there is a beginning, a middle, and an exam or a final paper, whereas actually what we want to do is convey content and enhance people's learning. So there are two of us at the county school who are pretty well engaged at the university level. I sit on the HarvardX faculty committee, which reviews proposals, and Dan Levy is actually currently co-chairing the research committee. So we're keeping tabs on what's going on and continuing to move forward here at the school. So I want to take 1 minute just to have you think about this in your own way. So you should each have an index card. If you need a pen, let me know. I'd like you to, if anybody needs one, we have more in the back. Just take 1 minute to, I think we need another one over this way. Take 1 minute to jot down, jot down something you remember learning. Not something you know, it should be something you know, but not just simply something you know, but something you remember learning. And that could be something in an academic context, it could be something you use in your daily life, it could be something about a hobby, something you remember learning, you remember when you learned it.
Skill or knowledge?
Anything. For me, it happens to be how to make a left turn. I remember where I was and how I learned how to make a left turn in a car. Something you remember learning? Anybody came up with something? Steve, do you have?
Yeah, I remember learning how clouds are formed, or elementary science.
Okay. Do you remember how did your experience learn?
Teacher in the front of the classroom, the textbook, with pictures and illustrations. And
Okay,
talking back and
so
forth.
some visual and
Correct.
someone talking together.
I learned last week how to put speed dial numbers into my mobile phone.
And how did you learn it?
Well, the IT guy explained to me that I should have asked my 8-year-old grandson.
And your 8-year-old grandson would have talked you through it, and you would have,
Yeah, but in the meantime, I've got the IT guy showing me now and then.
and now you know how to do it, okay? And any other examples? Yeah,
Learn how to read a topographical map.
Okay.
How the lines, when they're closer,
okay,
steeper grade change than farther apart.
okay, and what's so memorable about that? Why does that moment come to mind? How did you learn how to read the map?
Well, I remember it was in a science, it was like a 7th grade science class, I think 6th grade.
Boy, elementary school, middle school science seems to be stuck. I really hope that's true for my kids.
And it was kind of a revelation that it was in conjunction with weather as well, so all the little weather signals and whatnot, yeah.
Were there clouds involved?
Well, changes in temperatures, actually change in weather, I guess, another way meteorologists read that, so. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, close enough. So what's interesting about how we learn things is that there's usually sort of there are a number of different ways in which these moments become salient for us. For some people, it's because they're actually doing something. So you're actually sort of now putting speed dials in, and then you cemented that, because I bet after the IT guy left, you put in your grandson and a couple of other numbers, and now it's really in there. You kind of cemented it because you went and you did it. In other cases, it's an elementary or middle school science class, and there was something very visual about it, like the puffy clouds, like just stuck with you, and the kind of wispy clouds, kind of, there were different things about it, the visual, as well as having somebody explain it to you at the same time. For you, I remember that kind of process also, and the closer together means something, and now when I go hiking, I actually know, it's going to get steep now. So sometimes it's the combination of how you get the information, that there's the visual with the auditory, which there's research that suggests that actually enhances the cognitive processing, but also there's the kind of constructing your own knowledge out of it. So the IT guy showed you what to do, but you constructed your own knowledge. It became something that you know, you kind of own it now. You watch the weather and you're like, cumulonimbus, or, I'm going hiking and this is going to be steep. So it's how you use the information, I think, that helps you. And so what we try to do on campus is really think about that sort of active engagement in learning, that it's not just someone talking at you. You could get the lecture on the clouds, but what really cements it for you is them watching the weather report and thinking about it, and looking at the sky and saying, oh, it's going to rain, and it's not just because it looks gray, but because it's that kind of cloud or something like that. So we really try to think about how people learn, and to try to use that. It's really, for us, not about the teaching, it's about the learning. And so understanding how people learn helps us develop ways of enhancing that opportunity. And so what I want to talk about now is a little bit of how we do that in the digital sense, how we create these opportunities for learning in the digital sense without a whole online course. So there are full online courses, and we can get back to them, but I want to talk a little bit more about other means of doing this. So this handsome young man is named Benjamin. He's 17 years old. He's not 8. He was 8. Now he's 17. And he interacts with technology very differently than I do. He has one of these, and when you ask him what a phone is for, he starts touching it and tapping it and texting his friends. And when they're working on an assignment, or a friend has a question about the chemistry test the next morning, I only find out later. Oh, he's my son, by the way. I only find out the next morning that so-and-so, was asking him questions about the chemistry exam, because the phone never rings. Okay, they're on Facebook messaging, they're on their phones. He does use this, to his ear occasionally, only to call me, because I'm the only person he would need to actually talk to. But he communicates with other people, and they really, I know that there are teenagers who aren't communicating. He actually communicates very well, but he does it very differently than what I'm doing right now, which is face-to-face with you. So when we think about the learning that this generation, he's younger than most of our students, of course. We don't have high school kids, we don't have undergraduates, we have early career and mid-career students and executives in our executive education courses. But when we think about what's changing and how people interact with information, we need to be forward-thinking to the fact that he communicates with people, he interacts. An online discussion board would not be outlandish for him. Whereas for me, I would want to be in the room with you. But for him, that's a very different experience. So that's another area that we are paying attention to. So one of the things that we've experimented.
Have you asked your son, would he give up classroom exchanges for online? Seems to be an interesting question.
I asked him that question point blank. No, I haven't asked him that question.
It would be interesting to know.
I could text him and ask him if he's
Does that mean he's offline?
This is another entire conversation, but the high school had a revision to its cell phone policy, actually, because it was ridiculous to ban them because the kids would just ignore it. So now they have, you can use them between classes and things like that. Teachers still don't allow it out during class. Sorry.
Well, just a curious thing, he might say, well, my future is online chat rooms. I don't need to see.
I don't know what his answer would be. My answer would be to come back to the conversation that you and I had before class, and the fact that I have, a total of 10 things to show you here, or 10 slides worth of things to show you, and I'm probably halfway through, but we're having an interesting series of questions and discussions here, and that would not happen if I had prepackaged this ahead of time. So I continue to maintain that the value, that there's a lot of content that can be delivered online but offline, outside of the classroom, but that the value comes from the exchange of ideas, and that the learning comes from the exchange of ideas. I think you will probably remember, hopefully you'll remember something from this session, but what you remember will have something to do with the exchanges that we're having and less to do with what was on the screen. Okay, so one of the things that we're experimenting with, and I should say overall, our approach is to experiment, assess the experiment, learn from that, and try something new. So we don't claim to have all the answers, we claim to be an environment where we try things, we see what works best, we adapt and update and try to do better. So I'm going to show you an example of an online module. This was, if you watched it from start to finish, I think it would have taken you 10 minutes, but it's in little segments, and they're little quizzes. So there's also some research that shows that if you're going to have people follow some kind of online video or presentation, that you want to test relatively frequently. It maintains focus and they don't go off and mind wander, etc. So it's not my area of expertise, but this was a study that was done in the psychology department. But in any case, so let me show you an example of an online module. So this comes from, I'm going to just grab the sound really quick. It's super loud, sorry. Let's see if I can bring it down before I hit play again. So what you see, this is from an economics course that I was teaching a year ago. There's kind of an index all the way down the left. We can see the little times. There's a 22-second intro, 16 seconds on that, 32 seconds on that. Here's a long one, 1 minute and 5 seconds. It's in little segments. And you can also see these little quizzes, right? These are one-question quizzes. I'll show you an example. And if you get the wrong answer, it routes you to a review of that material. And if you get the right answer, you just keep going. So you can see if you added the whole thing up, it would probably take you less than 10 minutes to get through this. But if this were material that were more difficult for you, you could go back, you could review. And we got a lot of information from the students. I'm not going to spend a long time talking about it, but they really appreciated the self-paced aspect. Both the students who went through it quickly and the students who said, I never would have raised my hand as many times as I went back and listened to that. So let me see if I can not blast you out of the room with the volume. Let's see what we can do here. Down too far.
And then with the goods market combined.
So,
And we have also looked at
So there's me talking. If you click on an example
a decrease
here,
in the
there's
interest
a
rate.
graph. There are some of these. I'm not going to play the whole thing for you. The lines move. When you look at a textbook at a static graph, and there are all these different lines and whatever. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. happen to like economics, so this didn't bother me so much. But when you look at a graph with 4 different lines and a dotted line here and a new dotted line there, and it says it goes from Y0 to Y1, you're like, right? But if you actually see it happening with the audio at the same time, you process it differently. And so that's what we're experimenting with, is really kind of taking people through it. So there's the self-paced aspect, there's the combination of the visual and the audio, and then there are these quizzes, and I'll just give you an example here of one of these quizzes.
Is
You don't
cheating-
have to listen to my voice, but let's see, I don't really know what's going on here. I'm not even reading the answers, but I can pick one, right? And it says, nope, not white, let's look at Y, and then it routes you to explain that material a little better, and then you get another chance at the quiz. So I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this, but this is not an online course. This was an in-class course on campus, but the students, I got 15 minutes out of class, 20 minutes maybe with a lot of questions. And then what did we do during that time? Well, we actually had a debate over economic policy, and I assigned them to different roles and different perspectives, and they had to take on perspectives and argue for perspectives that weren't necessarily their own. And when I got information from them afterwards, they sort of felt like, well, it's not going to change how I vote for president or anything, that little 15-minute debate, but I did realize this particular aspect about this particular topic that I hadn't really thought about until I had to defend it. So what you can do in class when you get some of that information, some of that basic content outside of class, is really kind of fun and more interactive, more sort of creating the knowledge in the classroom as the students are communicating with each other. So that's another example of what we're doing. Okay. There's another way of using technology or digital means to enhance the learning of our students in the classroom. So one of the things that we can do, so in the beginning I was talking about these online courses, the MOOCs, and you can basically take content here and you can send it out to the world and people can access it. But there's the other direction, which is bringing the world back to our students. And so I'm going to show you a very short clip here, which was with some effort. We had a video conference with some alums of ours, alums. These particular alums had started a social impact bond endeavor, and they were in Colombia. And we had written a case about them. The organization's called Instiglio. And we had written a case about the process that they were going through in trying to work out these social impact bond with the financing and where there would be some appetite for it in Colombia. And the students read the case and before class, so this is the kind of process they went through. They read the case before class, they came in, we had a discussion for a while during class, and then in the last 20 minutes or so of class, we video conferenced in the founders who were in Colombia, and the students got to ask them questions that had arisen during the discussion or in their reading of the case. So in the clip that I'm going to show you, the sound is not great. This was not recorded for presentation. It was recorded for archival purposes. But what's happening in this exchange, which you see just a short clip of, is the case presents the information with which the students were able to do a very analytical set of work, analysis of what would be the best opportunity. Was it a program to alleviate teen pregnancy? Was it a program to improve early childhood education? A number of different social programs. Which was the one that that had the most likelihood of success in the circumstances that they were dealing with? The students did all of that work. We discussed it. At the end of the case, it turns out that when they changed locations, they were initially working with the governor of a state in Colombia, and then they ended up moving and working with the mayor in a city. They changed what program they were going to launch. And the student in the classroom, who's standing up, essentially facing the screen with the folks in Colombia facing back, basically says, "How come you changed?" And I don't know if you'll be able to, we'll see how the sound is with you. You can hear the answer. If you can't hear the answer, I'll tell you what the answer is.
And I think that there's a couple of reasons. First of all, now when you were looking at that table, what you were looking at was our analysis. That was literally a PowerPoint presentation that we delivered to the state government, the government entities. The case that switches a bit to 90 is the city of Medellin. which is more urban. So that matrix was put together in a very different context. We're talking about a rural area where the issues and context and causes around adolescence are.
Okay, so I don't know if you could hear it, but he's basically saying we were moving from a more urban area to a more, from a more rural area to a more urban area, and so the entire context was changing, and so needless to say, the analysis had to change along with it, because both the political environment, going from working with the governor to working with the mayor of the city, and the rural versus urban environment was changing. But the point of all of that is that the students had this case and they had this discussion, so there was a lot of sort of activity in the classroom, but then there was this extra piece that they could never have had otherwise, which was the ability to talk to the people who had actually made the decision and say, what is this case not telling me about how you made this decision? So we started from the beginning of this. I mean, we could have built this into the case, right? We could have just written another page of the case and said, oh, guess what, the context changed. But I think these students experienced it very differently by having this conversation, and that they will remember the conversation and therefore what they learned from that conversation. Going back to how you remember what you learned, right? I think that they will remember it more for the context in which they learned it. So we started off talking about courses that we could create here, that we could send out to the world, and how do we think about that. And I said that it's very important to us that as we're creating those courses or that content, that we're really thinking about the learning that we're trying to create in that, through that channel. And that comes back then to the materials that we create on campus, and then bringing the world back into the classroom for us. So we have a little bit of time left. I have one more video to show you, but I'm going to save it for the end, sort of as a wrap-up. And so, I mean, I've taken a number of questions as we've been going along, but I'd like to take some more questions, but also ask you a question, which is, as you think about the things that you do online these days that you didn't used to do online, just think for a moment of something that you do online now that, 10 years or 20 years ago you didn't do online. What works for you about that experience, and what doesn't? What do you like about that experience, and what don't you like about that experience, and how do we think about that in the context of teaching and learning? So, I don't know if you have any examples of things. Hannah?
So, I'll tell you one that I think creates attention for us teaching this stuff.
So Hannah's a faculty member here, just to be
here at the Kennedy School.
clear.
Hi. And so things that I most like online are things that save me time. Oh boy, I'm just standing here, I can, oh shoot, I forgot to order that, I forgot to pick that up at the store, or oh, what is that, I can look it up really quickly. And some of this flipped classroom stuff, a lot of the online stuff, doesn't necessarily save you time. And if anything, it could be adding to the student's advanced preparation, and I think that's a tension then. How we do this in ways that make the learning also more efficient as well as rich, I think is one of the challenges.
Right. There's efficient and there's effective.
Yes.
And sometimes there's a trade-off between those. So for example, and I'm not pushing the online module in particular as the right answer, because I think everything we do is an experiment, as you know, and we try to learn from it. But one of the things there is that for some students that was very efficient, because the students who knew the material,
Your test.
the little online
Yes, exactly.
module,
No, that's
right?
a beautiful example, yeah.
But there are video versions of that. I mean, I don't actually know how to do this, but I'm sure my son, your kids, know how to accelerate the video. So you watch it double time and, it sounds, like a high-pitched voice or whatever it is. But if you really know the material, you fast forward through some sections and you don't have to sit through the whole lecture. So I think that for the students who could go through the material quickly, this might be an efficient way to do it. I mean, think about if you wanted to look something up and you look it up on Wikipedia and the first paragraph is all stuff you skim down to the stuff you're looking for, right? So for the students who want to go through it quickly, I think they maybe can do that. But then there's the trade-off with effective. The students who can't go through it quickly because it's more difficult for them, they're going to have to spend more time on the course anyway, because the course is difficult for them. So they're going to spend it in my office hours, in your office hours, in the teaching fellow's office hours. Are they going to spend it, taking their friend or their roommate away from studying for their other course, or are they going to rewind this and watch it again? So I'm making it sound like it's the answer to everything, but it does have its advantages.
But choosing those things that do that.
It's the choosing.
That's right.
It's the choosing. I mean, I'm not a proponent of throwing everything digital. I'm really a proponent of thinking about what's the learning objective here, right? It's not about the teaching. If it's about the teaching, I can stand up in front of a camera, right? That's easy. That's, you know, hey, it's more efficient for me because then I don't have to go to class, right? But there's no learning going on there.
I would be interested in how expensive it is to transform an existing course into an online course. So how many hours do you have to invest to, you know, develop 1 hour online course? For example?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I don't know whether you know either. I mean, HarvardX, I know that it's many, 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 many hours and video producers. I don't think I have a dollar number. Do you know?
No.
So
I
our
mean,
CIO is here also. I've got ringers in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about a MOOC where you actually want to have interaction as compared to the talking head, asynchronous, you know, but you want asynchronous interaction. As Suzanne said, it's the design, you have to totally redesign. And particularly because we're in the early days where we don't know how to do that and we don't have best practices and efficient model, you're talking about a significant amount of time. And I don't know if it's 10x or whatever, but it's probably at least that. But that's to get going. I mean, you remember we're in the startup phase of this. For presumably the model's going to change, and we're going to learn how to do that just like we learn how to, you know, do current pedagogy.
And then so the production piece of this, once you've figured out how I want to actually teach this course to maximize learning in a distance setting, okay, so now you've invested that, so now you can replicate that for that, you know, course to run it the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time. But if it's this SPOC or whatever version of it, if it's a high-touch, synchronous, interactive experience, then you need the staffing to support that every time that you run it. So there's the starting, and then there's the replication.
So then my question is, who is doing the production? Do you have your own Harvard people, a whole department that's doing it?
HarvardX is a department of the university, yes.
Just
So
for MOOCs.
just for the online courses, yeah. So HarvardX is not just a label to the courses that we put up. This is one of the few things, depends on how well you know Harvard, but my Harvard's phrase is every tub on its own bottom. My phrase is, we're not a university, we're a collection of schools. That's, you know, if you know any other universities, I did my graduate work at Stanford. It's a very different environment. It's one of the great things about Harvard because there is this kind of specialization and the ideas that can come up and the excellence that can arise in that setting, and then it can be endlessly frustrating.
So each school has their
But in this case, the university got its act together, and HarvardX is a department of the university. So there is some local time put in, but a lot of the local time is really put in by the faculty in designing it. In our SLATE program, Carolyn's lots of ringers in here. Carolyn Wood is the director of SLATE, working with faculty on the pedagogical approach and the learning goals. But the video production is for the most part done at HarvardX, and a lot of the course design is done there.
What's SLATE?
Oh, sorry, SLATE. SLATE is a department within the Kennedy School, small, lean, very active department in the school. It stands for Strength in Learning and Teaching Excellence. It is, give you the little 30-second version. It's got sort of 3 prongs to it. One prong is about pedagogy and teaching and learning and really focusing on the learning. And I'm actually going to show you a video that our video producer in SLATE has done. A second prong is course materials, so that includes not only traditional cases but multimedia case production. We have several multimedia cases already, and also from SLATE, we've got ringers all over the classroom here. The third part is assessment. Right? So everything that we do, we try to learn from it. We try to assess and evaluate and learn. So just put that in there.
Just the digital learning in the classroom, how does this affect the way we're teaching or teachers to teach?
We're teaching our teachers to teach.
Because that's got to really change it.
Right. So every year when we have new faculty and we have existing faculty. So when new faculty come in, we have a new faculty institute, and we talk about what's different about teaching here. And we introduce them not only to the SLATE program, but to the resources more broadly of the school, and not only the cases, but multimedia cases. But also, I think our general approach is as we experiment, and these are really little experiments, 2 or 3 of us have done these little online modules, but then we try to share what we learned. We don't claim to know all the answers, but we just try to talk to other faculty and say, well, here's what I did, here's how much time it took, here's what I think worked well, here's what I do differently next time, and then someone else goes off and tries it, and it's just a, percolating. So,
I just wanted 2 points. One about Hannah's point about the efficiency. I had the privilege of listening to Professor Liu talk about HarvardX in New York. And, some of the points he made were so interesting about what you're all learning about this, what happens in the new dimensions of learning. And I think one of the most interesting points he made was in experimenting and the idea of that engagement when you're ready to learn, like what what it feels like, and as we're all thinking about what we learned, and I was thinking, it's like every time you learn something, it's your mind's in a certain state. And one of the things he talked about was how to use materials beforehand to get people in that state, so you walk in the classroom, you've actually alluded to it several times, like, oh, I wish I'd done this or that or the other, so that you can use this very valuable time to the most efficient use, so that people are prepped, and that's not always just watching a video. I mean, he had brought up as an example a class on trafficking women, and bringing in survivors to talk and tell their stories to the class. And so it's not just a matter of videoing them telling their story, because that doesn't get you into that, and so it's for the professors, to your point, like how and to reach out to professors, and like how would you experiment with trying, when you've taught this class for however many years and you've seen what happens and the dynamics, how can you think in a bold way almost about use of what's available to get people to that state, so that whatever time you do have in the classroom is used to the utmost efficiency.
No, I agree.
And that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree completely with that. I would add one more aspect to that, which is, just since we're all here in the context of the capital campaign, if you think about, just look at how you're sitting here, and does your chair move? Could you easily work with someone 2 rows behind you or 4 seats away from you? If I'm not the focus of attention the whole time, is this really the right way to be sitting and experiencing the learning environment? So there are a number of aspects, and I think the part that you emphasized about before you come to class, so you think most of the time in class, has a number of dimensions to it. We have only a couple more minutes. I'm happy to stay. You guys, you have a half hour till your next session. I'm not going anywhere, so if anybody wants to talk more about particular issues. But I do want to leave you with sort of a summary piece. So I emphasized a lot that we care about how people learn, and I emphasized that people learn best when they're sort of participating and creating that knowledge. So, so we're using digital teaching tools, both the courses online, the online modules, the bringing people in from other places to enhance that learning. There are a number of other things that we're doing both through the state program and around the school, and we're really trying to learn. I don't claim to have all the answers. We're really trying to figure out what works and how best to reach our students to enhance their learning. And so what I'm going to show you now is a short video, so you can stay. It's about 3 minutes long. Which is sort of a summary of the range of approaches that we've been using to promote active learning. And this is what we're hoping to really expand upon and bring to more classrooms and more courses in the school. So
Our job at the community school is to prepare a new generation of public leaders to fix a world in trouble.
The problems that we face are more complex, more intricate, more involved, more global. So we have to think about different ways of teaching and learning.
We've known for a long time that people don't learn best when they're being talked to.
You get a lecture and you get a lot of information thrown at you at once, but it's not necessarily inculcated in your daily understanding of how to address a policy problem.
We now realize that there are much more effective ways of teaching and learning. One of the things we're doing is experimenting with the physical layout of the classroom.
When I first walked into the classroom, I think I was a little bit confused. We weren't passive students listening to someone in the front of the class. We were engaging with each other because we were face to face.
There was a real flattening of the hierarchy, where instead of being, as they put it, the sage on the stage, I was kind of an orchestrator of student learning rather than the deliverer of knowledge.
Students are creating the class themselves, or a part of fueling the material that's coming out of it.
Class time is the scarcest time of all.
So the professor can either spend a lot of time in class just talking to the students, or he can spend more time in class discussing with the students and being more interactive.
We've been experimenting with a flipped classroom where we deliver material outside of class and before class.
What we've done is create online modules.
Letting the students learn about the concept at their own pace.
And when they come to class, they come with that knowledge ready to work on hard problems.
As evidence accumulates about what works, it changes the whole school's conception of good teaching. Somebody experiments with simulations, whether kind of traditional role-playing simulations or more novel game-based simulations, where people have to deal with a state of the world generated by a roll of the dice. And nobody knows what's going to happen.
While we're dealing with simulations or case studies or a video conference, we're engaged in real-world problem solving, but we're still in a classroom. We have to send our students out into the world to practice.
When you get on the ground, you really get to see these concepts come alive.
In the world, everything is messy.
It's real people with real problems, needing real solutions.
We've had so many moments where things didn't go as planned. And I think if everything goes as planned, it's because you're not adapting, you're not iterating, you're not taking signals from the place that you're in.
There is no one best way to engage in active learning.
We don't know the right answer yet.
We have so many ideas.
And we need to continue experimenting, evaluating what we're doing so that we can scale up future innovations.
It's really great to come to a place where there are people so concerned with the learning of the students.
The most important way in which we have an impact on the world is by improving what our students can do. Teaching right, is action the most powerful sort.
It's given me the most confidence that I can succeed at the business of government.
So, that's it.